The police chief gave a simple order: arrest him. No questions. No hesitation. A black man in a suit had refused to show ID, and that was enough. What no one knew, not even the chief, was that the man they just handcuffed was the state attorney general, and that one mistake would tear their entire department apart. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you like stories like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. The sun was just beginning to fall behind the hills when Leonard Kane stepped out of the rental car, the heat still rising off the asphalt. His gray suit clung to him from the long drive, but his walk remained steady and slow, like a man with no hurry. He glanced around the small town square, modest shops, a diner with flickering lights, and a courthouse sitting like an old monument in the center. The kind of town where a new face felt like a threat. Leonard carried a worn leather briefcase in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. Nobody knew him here, and that was exactly what he wanted. As Leonard crossed the street toward a gas station, two patrol officers sat inside their cruiser, parked under the shade of an old oak tree. One of them, Officer Clint Riley, leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "You see that?" he asked. "Who walks around here in a suit like that?" His partner, Officer Joel Baines, shrugged but didn't look away. "Probably lost," he said. Clint shook his head. "Nah, something feels off." He opened the door and stepped out, fixing his belt with the same motion he used every time he wanted someone to know he was in charge. Leonard filled the tank in silence. He could feel the eyes on him. He always could. It wasn't paranoia, it was experience. He'd stood in rooms filled with senators and judges and never felt watched the way he did in places like this. And he wasn't surprised when Clint walked up behind him and said, "Evening, sir. Mind if I ask what you're doing in town?" Leonard turned slowly, calm and collected. "Just driving through," he replied, his voice low and measured. "You got some ID on you?" Clint asked, eyes already scanning Leonard's face like it didn't belong. Leonard paused, looking the officer in the eye. "Is there a reason you're asking?" Clint gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a routine question." Leonard's answer didn't change. "Then I'll keep my ID to myself." The smile dropped. Clint's hand rested near his holster. "You refusing to cooperate?" Leonard's voice stayed steady. "I'm not breaking any law. Am I being detained?" Joel got out of the cruiser now, walking around the back with a slower, more deliberate pace. He stood on the other side of Leonard, like a man ready for a fight he didn't need to start. "You think you're slick or something?" Joel said. "You don't get to make the rules out here." Leonard picked up his briefcase, still calm. "If I were you, I'd be very careful about what you're about to do." Clint turned toward his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. We've got a male, mid-40s, refusing to identify, possibly armed, requesting instruction." There was a crackle of static. Then the voice of Chief Ray Norris came through, loud and clear. "Bring him in. No exceptions." Leonard didn't flinch. He stood there, expression unreadable, while Clint moved closer and Joel positioned himself behind him. Neither officer noticed the badge tucked deep in Leonard's inner jacket pocket. Neither had asked the right questions. They just saw a black man with confidence, and that alone was enough to set them off. And with that one call from Chief Norris, the town made its biggest mistake, because Leonard Kane wasn't a stranger. He was the State Attorney General of Virginia, and now everything was about to fall apart. The ride to the station was quiet, but the tension inside the patrol car was thick. Leonard sat in the back seat with his hands resting on his knees, his face calm, eyes watching the road like he was just out for a drive. Joel kept glancing at him through the mirror, his jaw tight, fingers tapping the steering wheel. Clint tried to act relaxed, but the way he adjusted the volume on the radio, the way he sat up straighter every time Leonard shifted slightly, it was clear he was second-guessing himself. At the station, dispatcher Monica Triggs looked up from her desk as the door opened. When she saw Leonard walk in with both officers at his sides, her eyebrows lifted. "What's this?" she asked, standing. Clint responded quickly. "Suspicious individual refusing to show ID. Possible threat." Leonard said nothing. He simply looked at Monica as if memorizing her face. She held his stare for a moment, something about him making her nervous. She looked back at Clint, confused. He didn't resist? No, Joel answered, a little slower this time. But something's off with him. Got that attitude. Like he's testing us. Monica hesitated. You ran his face through the database? Clint frowned. Didn't get a name. No ID, remember? Leonard finally spoke, his voice clear and steady. Still not illegal, not in this state, not if I haven't been charged. Monica blinked. She wasn't used to people talking like that in this room, at least not people in handcuffs. Clint grunted. Yeah, well, you're here now. Let's see what we find. Joel guided Leonard toward the booking area, while Clint filled out the paperwork. Leonard moved calmly through each step. Fingerprints, mugshot, personal belongings. A thin officer named Terry Knox handled the camera. As he snapped the photo, he looked uneasy. You sure about this? He muttered under his breath. Leonard looked him dead in the eyes. Are you? Terry didn't answer. They locked Leonard in a holding room with gray walls and a metal bench. The door shut behind him with a thud. He sat without a word, resting his briefcase beside him, untouched. Outside the room, Joel pulled Clint aside. Something's not right. He hasn't even asked to make a call. So? Clint said, brushing him off. Guys like that always wait for a lawyer to show up before they act tough. Joel wasn't so sure. No, man, it's like he already knows how this ends. And he was right, because 3 blocks away, Deputy Attorney General Irene Roston had just finished reading a text message that made her entire face go cold. It came from a number only a few people knew. It had just 3 words. They arrested me, and now the clock had started ticking. Irene Roston didn't waste a second. She stood from the long oak conference table in the Capitol building, the quiet buzz of low conversation around her breaking as chairs scraped back and aides turned to look. Her voice was clipped and firm. Cancel the rest of my schedule. I need a vehicle prep now. One of the junior staffers began to ask a question, but the look she gave him made him close his mouth halfway through the sentence. She was already dialing as she moved. Sergeant Green, she said into her phone, stepping into the hallway. The Attorney General has just been detained. Somewhere outside Madison County, I don't have the exact precinct yet. Assemble 3 marshals and meet me at the motor pool. I want eyes on that town in 45 minutes. And make sure the press doesn't find out. Not yet. Back at the station, Chief Ray Norris sat in his office with his feet kicked up on the desk and a coffee going cold by his side. The window behind him was half covered by the blinds, the slats letting in just enough of the late-day sunlight to make the dust in the air shimmer. He was in a good mood. He had handled things, reminded his boys how things were supposed to run. This town didn't get surprises, especially not ones wearing $1,000 suits and refusing to answer simple questions. The door opened without a knock. Clint walked in, trying to mask the unease on his face. He's booked, he said, handing over a copy of the intake form. Ray didn't look up. And? No ID. Nothing on him but a briefcase. Said we were making a mistake, but quiet about it. Ray finally glanced at the form, then leaned back inside. Then we keep him in holding. No ID means we run prints statewide. Let the system tell us who he is. Joel hovered in the hallway behind Clint, not coming in, but listening. Ray saw him. Something bothering you, Joel? Joel hesitated. He's too calm. I've seen drunks, dealers, guys high out of their minds. They're all loud or scared or mean. This one? He just sat there, like he's waiting for us to catch up. Ray narrowed his eyes. You worried about something? Joel shook his head. Just saying, Chief. This one doesn't feel right. Ray waved him off. Then let it not feel right. We're not here to feel. We're here to control. You both did your job. End of story. Back in the holding room, Leonard remained still. He had checked the corners of the room when he walked in, saw the weak bulb overhead, the chipped paint behind the bench, the small security camera angled toward him. He knew how many steps it was to the door, how long the screws on the hinges had likely been there. He wasn't a man just sitting in silence. He was counting. He checked his watch. 37 minutes since the arrest. That meant Irene would be in a car by now. Marshall's with her. He knew the process. He had helped write half of it. Outside, Monica stood by the main desk when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. An unfamiliar number, but the area code was from the capital. She answered cautiously. Dispatcher Triggs. A pause, then a man's voice. Low, controlled. This is Marshal Kent. We are en route to your station. Do not alert your chief. Do not say my name aloud. Do not hang up. You've made a serious mistake. Monica's heart skipped. The line went dead, and in that moment she realized this wasn't just another name on a form. Chief Ray Norris sat with his feet still kicked up, sipping from his now lukewarm coffee. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was. Not in this town. Nothing ever pushed back here. No audits, no press, no trouble. He built it that way. Ray had spent 20 years turning this place into something that ran on fear and silence, and he liked it that way. But trouble wasn't waiting for permission anymore. Outside the station, two black SUVs pulled into the lot without sirens, without warning. No logos, no lights. 4 figures stepped out quickly. 3 wore dark suits. 1 wore a simple black windbreaker with a badge clipped to the collar. Marshal Kent didn't hesitate. He was already walking up the steps before the others had closed their doors. Inside, Monica stood frozen for a few seconds after the call ended. She looked around. Clint was at the vending machine. Joel was thumbing through a report near the front desk. The chief's door was still shut. She swallowed hard, stood up, and walked toward the back quietly, as if moving too fast might call attention. She opened a supply closet and pulled out the emergency protocol folder, flipping straight to the chain of authority section. And there it was. Leonard Kane, State Attorney General. Photo, bio, clearance level. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned the page. Then the door burst open. Marshal Kent walked in without asking, flashing his credentials to her only for a second, just long enough to confirm what the voice on the phone already said. Monica nodded, stepping aside. Kent's voice was low but firm. Where is he? Holding room. Last one on the left, she whispered. He gave a short nod. No alarm, no noise. Keep them distracted. She turned, stepping back into the main room like nothing had happened. At that same moment, Clint looked up. You good? Monica nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, just copiers acting up. Marshal Kent moved fast down the hallway. He didn't knock. He didn't wait. He opened the holding room door, and Leonard looked up the second it swung open. No surprise, no relief, just recognition. They're here then, Leonard said. Yes, sir. We need to move you now. Leonard stood, picking up his briefcase. No cuffs? We're not here to make it a show, Kent replied. They left through the back hallway, exiting quietly through a utility door that led to the parking lot. No one in the main room noticed. Not yet. Back inside, Chief Norris opened his door, stretching as he stepped out. Someone get an update on our mystery man? He asked, scratching the back of his neck. Joel looked up. He's still in holding. Ray grunted. Good. Let's see if he still feels clever after a few more hours sitting in concrete. That's when the second SUV pulled out of the lot and sped off. Joel glanced through the window, his brow furrowed. Who was that? Monica didn't answer, because for the first time since she started working there, she wasn't sure what side she was standing on. The police station had returned to its usual stillness, but it wasn't the calm kind. It was the kind that came before a storm. Chief Ray Norris stood near the front desk, hands resting on the counter, drumming his fingers. He didn't like being kept out of the loop, not in his station, not in his town. Clint, he called, not looking back. Go check on our guest. Let's see if he's ready to start talking. Clint, still sipping from a soda bottle, gave a lazy nod and pushed himself off the wall. Sure thing. Joel shifted in his chair, a strange weight sitting in his stomach. He couldn't explain it. Not yet. But something had gone off track. Clint walked down the hallway toward the holding cells. He reached the last door and tapped on it. Hey, suit man, you want to stop playing games or... He froze. The room was empty. No briefcase, no man. Just the bench and a closed camera box mounted on the ceiling. The red light on the lens was off. Clint took a full second to register what he was seeing. Then he spun on his heels and ran back to the main room. He's gone. Ray turned slowly. What do you mean he's gone? I mean the damn holding cell is empty. Ray stormed past Clint, Joel right behind them. He reached the room and looked inside. His jaw locked. Where the hell did he go? Joel checked the hallway door. Back exit. Clint looked confused. We've got cameras, motion sensors. There's no way someone just walked him out without setting something off. Ray's voice rose. Then why is he not here? Back in the front, Monica stood quietly behind her desk, pretending to read something on her monitor. But her heart was pounding so loud she couldn't even hear the words on the screen. Joel walked past her, heading for the rear cameras. Clint was already on the radio, calling in an officer from patrol. Ray didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Monica. What do you know? He asked. She blinked. Excuse me? You've been on dispatch all night. No visitors, no exits, no alarms. So unless this guy sprouted wings, he didn't leave alone. Monica's lips parted, but no words came. Ray stepped closer. You know what I hate most in this job, Monica? She didn't answer. Surprises. Before she could reply, a loud knock hit the front glass door. A uniformed deputy rushed to open it. Outside stood Captain Mara Ellison from the State Bureau. Behind her, two plainclothed officials held briefcases. Her presence was heavy. Nothing about her expression suggested courtesy. Ray stepped forward, suddenly more guarded. What's this about? Mara didn't return the greeting. Where's Leonard Kane? Joel, walking back in from the hall, froze. Clint's hand dropped slowly from his radio. Monica looked down at her desk. Ray blinked once. Who? Mara stepped through the door, her voice like steel. The man you arrested earlier today. Tall, black, gray suit, no ID. Ring any bells? Ray cleared his throat, trying to recover. He refused to identify himself, said nothing. Because he didn't have to, she snapped. He's the sitting state attorney general. The room fell completely silent. Joel looked at Clint, who looked like someone had just kicked the air out of him. Monica didn't lift her eyes. Ray's mouth opened, but Mara raised a hand to stop him. He's already off your property, escorted by U.S. Marshals. You don't need to worry about where he is. Ray tried again. There was no warning, no credentials. You mean you didn't wait for any? Mara shot back. And you've been running this place long enough to know that's not how you handle things anymore. Not unless you're trying to bury someone. Ray's jaw tightened. Mara took a step closer. Here's what's going to happen now. I'm taking every report from this building, every recording, every arrest file from the last 5 years, starting tonight. Clint muttered, We didn't even touch the guy. Joel said nothing. Monica stared at the keyboard, her fingers still. Mara turned back to Ray. You thought he was nobody, but he's been watching this town for months, reading your reports, studying your numbers. You didn't just arrest the Attorney General. She paused. You handed him everything he needed to burn this department to the ground. Ray didn't speak. He couldn't, because in that moment, for the first time in years, he realized he wasn't in control anymore. The station wasn't loud, but the silence inside it had changed. It was no longer the quiet of control. It was the silence of realization, of mistakes finally catching up. Joel stood near the front desk, one hand resting on the edge as he watched Captain Mara Ellison move with complete authority. She wasn't asking questions. She was giving orders. A pair of state officials were already collecting files from the records room, hard drives being unplugged, boxes being labeled. Clint leaned against the wall near the coffee machine, arms crossed, eyes following every movement. His mouth stayed shut, but the redness creeping up his neck betrayed the panic crawling under his skin. He knew he had messed up. They all did, but no one said it out loud. Ray tried to keep his voice level. There was no warning, no flag. If he wanted to announce himself, he could have done it the second we made contact. Mara didn't even turn toward him. He did. He told you his name. You didn't listen. He didn't show ID, Ray insisted. Because he didn't have to, she snapped. You were looking for a reason to escalate, and you found one. Now he has everything he needs to come after you, and trust me, he will. Monica stood behind her desk, phone off the hook, pretending to manage dispatch while her eyes kept darting toward the hallway. She felt it in her chest, a tight pull of guilt and fear. She had watched it happen, every part of it. And for what? To protect a station that had never protected anyone but itself? Joel finally spoke. Why was he here? Everyone turned. Mara glanced at him, then answered plainly. Because there's been a string of complaints from this department. Unlawful stops, excessive force, evidence that goes missing. Internal reports with details blacked out. The Attorney General's office has been building a pattern. He came to see if it was real. Joel rubbed the back of his neck, staring at the floor. And now he knows it is. Monica's voice came out quietly. Why didn't he come with his team? Why come alone? Mara's answer was sharper than expected. Because he wanted to give you a chance, to treat him like any other citizen, to prove that maybe this station could do its job without someone looking over its shoulder. Ray scoffed. He came to trap us. No, she said, stepping closer to him. He came to test you. You failed. In the corner, Clint finally cracked. Look, we didn't beat the guy. We didn't shoot anyone. We asked for ID. He refused. We followed procedure. Mara turned toward him. No, you followed a pattern, the same one that's written all over your previous reports. Harassment disguised as protocol. Authority used like a weapon. The same names showing up in your logs again and again. Pulled over, searched, held without cause. She walked over to the evidence locker, nodding at one of her agents to pop it open. And let me guess, your body cams glitched? Joel looked away. Thought so, Mara muttered. The weight in the room got heavier. It wasn't just about Leonard Kane anymore. This was about every person they had pulled over who didn't look right to them. Every late-night booking without paperwork. Every civilian report that disappeared. Mara turned back to Ray, her tone low and final. You've been running this station like a kingdom. That ends today. Ray's voice was strained. So what now? I get suspended? Mara looked at him long and hard. You'll be lucky if that's all you get. I suggest you find a lawyer. Clint straightened. This is insane. One guy shows up without ID, and now we're all criminals? Mara's stare didn't blink. That one guy is the highest law enforcement officer in this state, and you dragged him into a cell because he didn't act scared enough. Ray opened his mouth to say something else, but the words died before they could form. He wasn't used to this. Not being the one in control, not being the one giving the orders. Mara gave her last command before stepping out. We'll be back tomorrow morning with a full investigative team. If you have anything to hide, now's the time to panic. She left without waiting for a response, her agents following her out with boxes in hand. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving the station in silence once again. Joel sat down slowly, staring at the floor. Clint muttered, "This can't be real." Monica finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "No, this was always real. You just thought no one was watching." By the time the state vehicles disappeared down the road, the police station no longer felt like a stronghold. It felt like a cracked shell, its walls still standing, but everything inside shaken loose. Ray sat in his office, the door half shut, staring at the corner of his desk where his badge sat beside his cold coffee. The voices outside barely reached him. Clint pacing, muttering, Joel flipping through old reports like the answers were hidden between the lines, Monica typing quietly behind the front desk. None of them said it aloud, but they were thinking the same thing. They had arrested the state attorney general, and not one of them had seen it coming. Joel stood by the hallway window, watching the empty street outside. He was never scared, he said out loud, mostly to himself. From the second we stopped him, he wasn't afraid of us. Clint didn't respond. He was leaning on the lockers, chewing at the side of his thumb. They'll spin it, he finally said. They'll use this to tear us apart. They'll go after every little thing. Joel turned. And what if they should? Clint narrowed his eyes. What's that supposed to mean? Joel didn't back down. You know what I mean. This isn't just about Leonard Kane. We've been pushing boundaries for years. You think those complaints disappeared by accident? You think people just forgot? Clint stepped forward, voice sharp. We were doing our jobs. No, Joel said, calm but firm. We were doing what we could get away with. There's a difference. Monica sat at her desk, pretending not to listen, but every word sank in. She remembered the calls that came in late, voices shaking on the other end, people asking for help, begging to speak to someone other than the officers who had just shoved them into the back of a car. She remembered how those calls were logged, or sometimes not. Inside his office, Ray lit a cigarette with slow, tired hands. He hadn't smoked in months, but this day had stripped away all his usual habits. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the smoke as it curled toward the ceiling. His phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. He let it ring twice before answering. "Yeah." A voice answered, cold even, and unmistakably from the Capitol. "This is Thomas Braddock, with the Office of Government Oversight." Ray's back straightened slightly. "We received a direct request from Attorney General Kane this morning. He submitted a formal complaint against the Madison County Police Department. Yours is the first name listed." Ray didn't speak. "We'll be issuing a notice of investigation within the next 24 hours. All communication, all body cam footage, and internal documents are to be preserved. If we find anything missing, or if any reports are altered after this call, charges will be filed." Ray ground his teeth, but his voice came out steady. "You think this is how he wants to fix things? Come into town, play gotcha?" The voice on the line didn't budge. "He didn't come to play. He came to see if the rumors were true, and you handed him the proof." Ray ended the call without another word. The phone sat in his hand for a long time before he placed it back down, slower this time. Outside the office, Clint was still pacing. Joel had stepped out for air, the door swinging gently behind him. Monica sat stiffly, her fingers idle now. The quiet filled every corner of the room. And then the silence was broken by the phone ringing on the front desk. Monica answered, her voice soft. "Madison County PD." A pause. Then she looked up slowly, her face drained. She stood up and walked to Ray's door. Knocked once. "It's the governor's office. For you." Ray stared at her through the glass for a moment before standing up and straightening his shirt. The pressure was closing in from every side now, like a room slowly losing air. He opened the door and took the phone from her, putting it to his ear without a word. Back at the Capitol, Leonard Kane sat in a quiet office surrounded by folders, reports, and audio recordings. His jacket hung on the back of the chair. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He was working, building a wall of evidence, brick by brick. A voice came from behind him. "Deputy AG Irene Roston. You sure you want to go this hard on them? It's going to get ugly." Leonard looked at her. "It's already ugly." She nodded. He turned back to the file in front of him. A photo of Chief Norris, then one of Clint, then Joel, then Monica. They wanted to see power. Now they will. Ray stood in his office. The receiver pressed against his ear, but all he heard was the voice of someone much higher, much colder, and far less interested in excuses. The governor's aide didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word was measured, sharp, and intentional. "You've put us in a political firestorm," the aide said. "The media doesn't have it yet, but they will. We've already been contacted by the Attorney General's press office. Do you understand what this means?" Ray didn't answer. The voice continued. "There will be hearings, possibly indictments, and the governor is not going to shield you." Ray finally spoke, low and bitter. "I've served this state for over 2 decades. And you've done it behind closed doors," the aide shot back. "Now the doors are open, and everyone's looking inside." The call ended. Ray slowly hung up the phone and just stood there. For a long while he didn't move. His hands were tight at his sides, the muscles in his jaw twitching. He'd built this department his way. No interference, no oversight, just quiet control. Now it was crumbling, and there was nothing he could say to stop it. In the squad room, Clint slammed a drawer shut. "You think they're going to arrest us?" Monica didn't look up. "I think they already have what they need. They just haven't moved yet." Joel had returned, his shirt collar damp from the cold air outside. He leaned on the desk, looking at both of them. "It's not just about Kane. They're going to dig into everything. Every file, every missing complaint, every call we didn't log." Clint snapped, "You sound like you're ready to testify." Joel didn't react. "I'm ready to be honest. That's not the same." Clint stared at him, then scoffed. "You always thought you were better than the rest of us." Joel looked at him squarely. "I just knew this day was coming." Clint turned to Monica. And you? You really gonna act like you didn't help cover for us? You were in dispatch for half of this. You took the calls. Monica looked up at him slowly, her voice quiet but unshaken. And every one of those calls still lives in my head. I remember every name, every voice. You think I'm proud of that? Clint didn't answer. Ray stepped out of his office then. His face had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced with something colder, like a man who realized the ground beneath him had vanished but still refused to fall. He walked to the middle of the room. We say nothing. No more talking, no more guessing. We let this blow over. Joel raised an eyebrow. That's not going to work this time. Ray looked at him. You're a cop, not a lawyer. Stay in your lane. Joel shook his head. I think I'm done staying in lanes. Ray's eyes narrowed. You walk now, and you walk into the middle of it. They'll eat you alive. Then I'd rather face it than sit here pretending we didn't bring this on ourselves. Ray stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're not clean, Joel. None of us are. Joel met his stare. Then maybe it's time we stop acting like we are. The front door opened again, this time not with authority, but quietly, almost unnoticed. A young woman stepped inside, nervous. She clutched a folded piece of paper in her hands. Monica looked up, confused. Can I help you? The woman nodded slowly. I filed a complaint last year. I was told it was dismissed, but I got this letter today. Monica stood and walked around the desk, taking the paper gently. As she read, her eyes widened. The letter was from the State Attorney General's office. It said her case had been reopened, and it was signed by Leonard Kane himself. Monica looked at the woman, then back at the letter. It's starting, she whispered. Ray watched from across the room. He didn't step forward. He didn't say a word, because he already knew. This wasn't just about one arrest. It was about the entire wall collapsing, brick by brick. And now the people they had once silenced were starting to speak. The next morning, the town of Madison County didn't wake up the same. The usual sleepy air was gone, replaced with something heavier, something uneasy. Rumors had spread faster than the morning fog, something about a powerful man being arrested, state agents raiding the station, and boxes of files disappearing into black vans. Most people didn't know the full story yet, but they felt it. The shift, the crack in the structure. Inside the station, no one spoke much. Ray sat at his desk, reading the same sentence of a report over and over, without taking in a single word. His phone had rung 6 times before 9 a.m., and he hadn't answered once. The mayor had left a voicemail asking if the rumors were true. Ray didn't bother responding. The mayor would soon have bigger things to worry about. In the squad room, Clint sat stiffly, staring at his badge on the table like it was a stranger. He hadn't touched it since sunrise. Joel stood near the file cabinets, arms crossed, watching as more state officials arrived with new subpoenas. They moved through the station with calm authority, opening drawers, labeling envelopes, copying hard drives. They didn't shout. They didn't ask for help. They just worked, like people who had already decided guilt and were now collecting evidence to prove it. Monica arrived late. She didn't apologize. She walked straight to her desk, pulled up her terminal, and began going through call logs. The paper from the woman the night before still sat folded neatly beside her keyboard. She glanced at it every so often, like it was anchoring her to something. Maybe guilt, maybe courage, maybe both. Joel walked over, quiet. You okay? Monica kept typing. I don't know what I am today. Joel nodded. You saw it coming before the rest of us. No, she said softly. I just stopped pretending I didn't. In the back office, 2 agents sat across from Ray. One of them was recording. The other had a list of case numbers, each one connected to a complaint, an unlawful stop, or a report that mysteriously disappeared. They weren't asking if Ray remembered the names. They were asking why certain evidence was logged after midnight, why cameras cut out only during specific calls, why, in several incidents, the same suspects were detained without ever being charged. Ray didn't give them much. I trust my officers, he said. You trusted them enough to ignore red flags? The agent asked calmly. Ray didn't answer. At the same time, across the town square, a press van pulled up. The reporter stepped out, adjusting her mic as the cameraman set up. She didn't need to be told where to aim the camera. The station was already surrounded by whispers. A few locals had gathered by the diner, watching silently, their coffee cups forgotten in their hands. Back at the Capitol, Leonard Kane sat behind a conference table filled with files, testimonies, photographs. He was listening to a recording, an old phone call from a civilian who had reported an officer for slamming him against a wall after a traffic stop. The voice shook as it played through the speaker. You could hear the fear, the desperation. I tried calling last year. They told me the report went missing. Please, I just want someone to listen. Leonard paused the recording and looked up at Irene Roston. How many of these were buried? Too many, she answered. He stood, pushing his chair back slowly. Start preparing the public brief. Names, dates, photos, redacted only where legally required. I want the truth out, exactly as it happened. She hesitated. You sure? Once this goes public, the floodgates open. Leonard didn't blink. Good, let it flood. Later that afternoon, Ray stepped outside for the first time in hours. He expected cameras, and there they were, flashing, rolling, capturing his face as it tightened against the light. A reporter stepped forward. Chief Norris, can you confirm whether you knowingly detained the Attorney General without cause? He didn't respond. Do you have any comment about the investigation? Nothing. Do you plan to resign? That one hung in the air longer. Ray looked out over the small crowd. Some faces he recognized, some he didn't. But one thing was clear. They were watching differently now. He turned and walked back inside without a word. Joel stood near the doorway as he passed, arms crossed. You know it's over, right? He said, not with hate, just honesty. Ray didn't stop walking. He didn't have to. The sound of truth had already caught up to him. By the end of the week, Madison County was no longer just a small dot on the map. It was the headline. Every major news outlet had picked up the story. Phrases like State Attorney General wrongfully detained, systemic abuse under investigation, and small town big cover-up were splashed across screens. Clips of the station's front entrance played on repeat. Commentators dissected body cam footage that had finally been recovered. Fragments of the stop, the tone of the officers, the unnecessary aggression. The internet had filled in the rest. Back at the Capitol, Leonard Kane stood in front of a podium, his face composed but firm. Reporters packed the press room shoulder to shoulder. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Every sentence was a scalpel. Abuse of power is not always loud. Sometimes it hides in routine, in paperwork, in silence. But that doesn't make it less dangerous. In fact, that makes it harder to see and easier to spread. Behind him, a board listed 22 cases connected to Madison County PD. Underneath each, a brief note. No charges filed. Body cam malfunctioned. Evidence lost. Complainant not contacted. Leonard continued. This wasn't about one officer. It wasn't about one bad stop. This was a culture that believed it would never be held accountable, that no one was watching, that certain voices didn't matter. His speech wasn't fiery, it was surgical. He wasn't just calling out names. He was dismantling an entire structure, brick by brick. Meanwhile, inside the now half-empty station, Clint sat at his desk, his badge turned upside down in front of him. He had barely spoken in days. Since the footage had been released, there had been threats online. Emails, messages. Some blaming him, some defending him, but none of them really knew what happened. Not all of it. He looked across the room at Joel, who was cleaning out his locker. Joel was leaving, officially resigning before the internal review could decide for him. He'd already met with the state investigators and told them everything, how the culture worked, how stops were chosen, how reports were edited before filing. He didn't hold anything back, not because he wanted to hurt anyone, but because he couldn't carry it anymore. Clint stood and walked over. You really told them everything? Joel looked up, nodding. Yeah. You think it'll matter? Joel closed the locker, turned slowly. It already does. Clint leaned against the wall, rubbing his face with both hands. I didn't think it would ever catch up to us. Joel gave a tired smile. That's the problem. We never thought. At the front desk, Monica handed over a flash drive to one of the state agents. "Call logs," she said. "From the last 3 years. Some were deleted. I recovered what I could." The agent nodded, already slotting it into his laptop. Monica didn't ask if it would help. She already knew. Outside, a group had gathered in front of the building. Not reporters this time. Residents. Some holding signs. Some just watching. Some former complainants whose cases had been dismissed or ignored. They weren't shouting. They were just there. Witnesses. Ray watched them from his office window, arms crossed. His suspension papers were already signed. He'd be officially removed by the end of the day. He'd hired a lawyer, but even that couldn't stop the tide. Leonard Kane hadn't just exposed him. He'd torn off the mask the whole town had been wearing. Ray had always believed he ran things, that no one could touch him, that the town worked the way it did because people wanted it that way. But now, as he looked out over the crowd and saw faces he thought he had forgotten, people he thought had moved on, given up, disappeared, he understood something different. They hadn't forgotten. They'd just been waiting for someone to give them a reason to speak again. Across town, in a quiet office lit by afternoon sun, Leonard sat at his desk. He was no longer reviewing files, no longer making calls. He was still for the first time in days. The work had only just begun, but something had already shifted. The silence he once felt walking through that small town, it wasn't silence at all. It was held breath. And now the town was finally exhaling, one truth at a time. The following Monday brought with it the final nail. At precisely 9 a.m., the Madison County Courthouse, a building that had long felt like an extension of the police station rather than an independent institution, received an official federal oversight team. Not reporters, not investigators, federal auditors, legal officers, and compliance officials with clipboards and sealed files. They weren't interested in stories. They were interested in facts, numbers, signatures, chain of custody trails, and everything pointed to a system that had protected itself for years, not its people. Inside the station, the air was thick with resignation. Officers avoided eye contact with one another. Computers sat idly. Nobody was answering phones. The usual noise, the radio chatter, the clack of boots on tile, the sound of printouts spitting from the back room, was gone. Even the air conditioning sounded louder now. Ray's office was stripped of his nameplate. The desk had been cleared except for a single envelope marked "Confidential, Pending Investigation." The chair behind the desk was empty, turned slightly toward the window. Ray himself wasn't there. His resignation had gone public over the weekend, though the official statement avoided words like resignation or suspension. It said he had chosen to step away from his duties during a period of departmental review. But everyone knew what it meant. His career, his grip over this department, was over. Clint sat in his cruiser, parked outside the lot, staring through the windshield. He hadn't clocked in. He didn't know why he had come. Habit, maybe hope, maybe something else. His uniform felt heavier than it ever had before. He hadn't worn the badge in 2 days, just kept it in his glove compartment. He watched as Eliza Monroe, one of the federal compliance officers, stepped out of the courthouse carrying a stack of files. She wasn't in uniform, didn't carry a gun, and yet the way people moved around her told Clint everything he needed to know about who held power now. Joel walked out of the station and paused when he saw Clint. He approached the car window, hands in his pockets. "You coming in?" Joel asked. Clint shook his head. "There anything left to come into?" Joel didn't smile. "Monica's been helping the audit team. They're asking about patrol logs from 2018. You remember that stop out on Hollow Bend Road?" Clint closed his eyes. He did. He remembered the kid. Thin, 17, no charges filed. But they'd left him in the cold for 3 hours in the back of the cruiser after finding a broken taillight. No call home, no paperwork, just fear. Clint didn't speak. Joel leaned in closer. "You ever think about apologizing?" Clint opened his eyes slowly. "You think it would change anything?" Joel stood up straight. "Maybe not for you, but maybe for the people we forgot, the ones we ignored." Clint didn't reply, and Joel walked away. Inside, Monica was finishing a long conversation with a federal auditor. She was tired. Her voice had begun to crack after hours of giving names, dates, times, but she kept going, because for the first time, someone was actually writing it down. She handed over a printed log. This one was changed. The original call said disturbance, but it was rewritten later as routine welfare check. I saw the change happen. The auditor looked at her. Can you testify to that? Monica didn't hesitate. Yes. Across town, a community center held a gathering. Not an official hearing, not a town hall, just people, finally talking. Former victims, parents, young men and women who had been stopped, searched, questioned for years without ever understanding why. And in the front row sat Leonard Kane. No podium this time, no microphones. He sat with a notepad in his lap, listening. A woman stood to speak. Her voice trembled at first. My brother was arrested 6 years ago. He never got a trial. He just disappeared from records. We kept calling the station. They said they'd look into it, but they never did. Leonard looked up. What's his name? She spoke it, and he wrote it down, slowly and clearly. A man stood next. I got stopped 5 times in 4 months. They kept asking where I was going, who I was with. Every time I asked why, they said it was a random check. But it was never random. An older man raised his hand. I used to deliver supplies to the station. I saw how they threw away reports, ripped up complaints, laughed about it. One by one they came forward, not to accuse, not with anger, but with truth. Plain, lived truth. It wasn't revenge they were chasing. It was acknowledgement. And Leonard gave it to them, with a nod, a pen stroke, a steady presence. Back in the station, Monica finally shut her drawer and leaned back in her chair. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was sitting in the right place. Clint never came inside. He started the engine, backed out of the lot, and drove away. Not fast, not in fear, just quietly. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he didn't belong there anymore. The sun had dipped low by the time the last auditor left the station that day, carrying a thick binder full of names, numbers, missing timestamps, and inconsistent patrol notes. The official statement from the Attorney General's office would be released the next morning, but everyone involved already knew what it would say. The numbers were damning, the patterns impossible to explain away. What had been whispered for years in alleyways and behind closed doors was now printed in black and white across dozens of pages. Inside what remained of the station's staff, there was no leadership, no direction. There was only Monica, typing a memo at her desk, the clack of keys echoing louder in the hollow quiet. Joel had stayed late, even though his resignation was already turned in and processed. He wasn't there as a cop anymore. He was there as a witness, someone who had seen how it started, how it grew, and finally how it cracked. You should go, Monica said softly, not looking up. They're not coming back tonight. I know, Joel replied from the doorway. I don't feel right leaving. Not yet. She stopped typing and turned to face him. You think it'll ever go back to normal? Joel leaned against the doorframe. I hope not. A quiet smile passed between them, small, tired, but honest. Out in the town square, more people had gathered. Not for protest this time, but for conversation. Families, teachers, local business owners. They stood in small circles, some sharing stories, others just listening. The silence that had once covered the town like a blanket had lifted, replaced with something unfamiliar but hopeful: transparency. Among the crowd stood Elijah Wren, a retired pastor who had lived in Madison County for over 50 years. He had seen every version of this town: when black children weren't allowed past certain streets after dark, when complaints were laughed out of the courthouse, when fear was passed down like inheritance. He held his granddaughter's hand as she looked up at him. Grandpa, is it over? Elijah smiled gently. No, baby. It's just started, but it's starting right. At the Capitol, Leonard Kane stood in his office, looking out the window as the city below flickered with lights. Irene stepped in behind him, holding a document, the final press draft. It's ready, she said. Everything's been cleared for release. Leonard nodded, still watching the streets. Good. She paused. You did what you set out to do. He turned to her. I didn't set out to be arrested, but I'm glad it happened. Even with the risk? It was never about risk, he said quietly. It was about forcing the truth into daylight. They didn't know who I was. That was the point. Irene handed him the statement. They do now. He didn't read it. Not yet. He looked at her instead. Tomorrow we start phase 2, civil action reviews, compensation for victims, public hearings, department-wide reform proposals. She nodded. Already being drafted. And the officers? Joel Richards will cooperate. Monica Triggs has turned over full logs and offered sworn testimony. Clint Riley is silent. Ray Norris's legal counsel has advised him not to speak. We'll proceed without him. Leonard looked down at the report. It was thick, heavy, but it was only a beginning. He walked over to his desk and placed the file down, then picked up a different folder. Inside were photos from the town, the station, the roads, the people. Pictures taken during his time there, quietly and unnoticed. He had documented everything, not to punish, but to prove. Proof. That was what they could never erase. Outside the Capitol building, the media vans were already gathering, reporters adjusting lights, sound engineers checking mics. Tomorrow would be a storm. Questions, headlines, endless noise. But tonight was still. Leonard sat down, folded his hands and closed his eyes for a moment. Not in exhaustion, but in reflection. In Madison County, for years, power had gone unchecked. Now it would be measured in accountability, in reform, in truth, and in the memory of every quiet voice that had once been ignored. The morning of the press release, the state courthouse was surrounded, not by protesters or police, but by the kind of crowd that doesn't gather unless something historic is happening. People came from all over the county, some with folded arms and skeptical expressions, others with quiet anticipation on their faces. There were no chants, no shouting, just murmurs, conversations. Journalists lined the steps with notepads ready, tripods planted, mics aimed. Inside, the final preparations were being made. The podium stood beneath the state seal, with a row of chairs behind it, empty for now. 2 ASL interpreters were reviewing their notes. Security moved with quiet precision along the perimeter. The atmosphere was serious, but not tense. It felt like the edge of something long overdue. Leonard Kane stepped into the room minutes before the address. He wore no dramatic colors, just a dark navy suit, white shirt, thin tie. No performance, just presence. As he walked toward the podium, cameras clicked softly and a few heads nodded in recognition. But no one tried to stop him for questions. His face said enough. He placed a folder on the stand, opened it, and looked briefly into the crowd before speaking. For years, complaints were filed in Madison County and disappeared. Victims were ignored. Patterns of misconduct were buried under silence and protocol. Last week, I was detained by that very department without cause, without violence, but with clear intent to assert control through intimidation. That moment was not a mistake. It was a window into a system that had gone unchecked for far too long. The microphones captured every word. But Leonard spoke as if addressing a room of neighbors, not a sea of journalists. What followed that arrest was not outrage. It was revelation. Records that had long been hidden surfaced. Internal procedures revealed cracks. Testimonies from those affected by unlawful stops, harassment, and wrongful detainment came forward. Honest, painful, and credible. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. Behind him, Irene Roston sat with hands folded tightly, watching every move with calm intensity. I did not come to Madison County to provoke. I came to observe. I came quietly, alone, unannounced. Because that's how truth reveals itself in places where power is abused. It doesn't need a spotlight. It only needs to be present. Leonard opened the folder and pulled out the top page. This is the summary of the Department of Justice's review of Madison County police operations. It confirms a systemic failure of oversight, an abuse of authority, and consistent misconduct spanning 7 years. 22 cases have already been reopened. Additional investigations are pending. As of today, Madison County Police Department is under full state supervision, and key personnel are under review for criminal conduct. A quiet gasp ran through the crowd, followed by a ripple of camera flashes. Leonard looked up again. But this is not about punishment. This is about rebuilding. The people of Madison County deserve more than shame. They deserve reform. They deserve leaders who serve with integrity, not fear. Accountability does not weaken law enforcement. It strengthens it. It restores trust. It reminds us that the badge is not a shield from consequences, but a promise of protection. He placed the document back down and straightened slightly. To the residents who came forward, your voices were heard. To the officers who cooperated, your honesty matters. And to those still clinging to silence, I encourage you to speak before silence becomes complicity. He stepped back, leaving the final words to hang in the air, heavier than applause. Outside in the town square, the crowd watching the live broadcast from mounted screens began to stir. Conversations broke out. Some smiled faintly. Others stood quietly with tears in their eyes. For many, it was the first time they had seen someone in power say what they had been trying to say for years. Inside the station, now half empty and hollow, Monica watched the live feed from her phone. She sat at the dispatch desk, her post for nearly 9 years. The same desk where voices had once called for help and found no answer. Now she watched a man she had helped detain speak truth to the entire state. She didn't cry. She just sat still, her face unreadable. In a modest apartment miles away, Joel sat with his wife and kids, the television casting soft light over them. His resignation letter still lay on the kitchen counter, unsigned but already accepted. When Leonard's speech ended, Joel turned to his wife. "He did it," he said. She nodded. "And so did you?" He didn't answer. He just looked back at the screen, still processing the shift of power, of truth, of himself. And in a quiet house near the edge of town, Ray Norris sat alone, blinds drawn, watching the broadcast end. His name hadn't been spoken directly, but he knew every word was aimed at him. He'd once believed silence meant safety. Now it was just evidence. No badge on his chest, no seat behind a desk, only memory. And it was louder than ever. The day after the press conference, a new sound filled Madison County. Voices, real ones, not hushed, not dodged, not buried under fear. Conversations in diners, on sidewalks, outside schools. People were talking again, not just about what had happened, but about what needed to happen next. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't anger either. It was something more rare in a place long ruled by silence. Honest reckoning. At the community center, a long folding table had been set up beneath a banner that read, "Citizens Review Form. Submit your story." Volunteers passed out forms and guided people toward private booths, where statements could be made, recorded, or written. Dozens came, some alone, some with family, some with years of pain tucked behind nervous smiles. An older woman named Mrs. Bennett walked slowly to the table with the help of her cane. Her son had been stopped over 10 times during his teenage years, each one logged as routine. She'd written letters, filed complaints, gotten no answers. Now she placed a folder on the table without saying a word. The volunteer accepted it with both hands and nodded. That folder would finally be read. Meanwhile, Joel had kept his word. Though no longer in uniform, he had volunteered to assist the Oversight Committee, offering context on the department's internal culture, patrol patterns, and unwritten rules. For the first time, his knowledge wasn't being used to cover tracks. It was being used to uncover them. He sat across from an ethics investigator that morning, drawing maps on a yellow pad, pointing out where certain stops were made, how the shift rotations were manipulated, and how certain problem areas were targeted. "This wasn't random," he said. "It was engineered." The investigator underlined the word in her notes. Back at the station, what remained of the staff was undergoing mandatory recertification and ethics retraining, overseen by state officials. Gone were the days of quiet winks, lazy reports, and unspoken alliances. Every decision now required documentation. Every report needed a second pair of eyes. The building felt smaller, more exposed, and for some that was exactly how it should feel. Monica now worked at the center of this transition. Her promotion to interim communications supervisor had surprised even her. But no one questioned the decision. Her honesty, even when painful, had been the start of the unraveling. Now she answered calls again, not with dismissal, not with filters, but with genuine listening. And something had changed on the other end of the line, too. People spoke more freely. They trusted her voice. One call came in mid-morning, a young woman reporting an aggressive traffic stop from 2 years ago that had never been followed up. Monica listened, asked the right questions, and at the end said gently, "We're listening now, and this time, your report won't disappear." In the Capitol, Leonard Kane reviewed testimony transcripts from citizens all across the county. He marked sections with red ink, cross-referencing, connecting dots. Patterns were emerging not just in Madison County, but across neighboring departments. The rot wasn't isolated, it was networked. He stood by the window once again, looking out over the state buildings. "We're not just patching leaks," he said to Irene, who stood behind him, arms folded. "We're rebuilding the whole pipeline." She stepped forward. "What happens when the public stops watching? What if this is just a moment?" Leonard turned to her. "Then we make sure it doesn't fade. We create permanent structures, community oversight boards, legal audits, transparency protocols. If the people forget, the systems won't." He paused. "And if the systems try to forget, we won't let them." Meanwhile, at a local radio station just outside Madison, an independent journalist named Darren Hale read a letter on air from a listener who had lived in the county for over 30 years. She wrote about how she had once called 911 after her son was pulled over, only to be told there was nothing they could do. Now, she said, for the first time, someone had apologized. Someone had called her back. Darren closed the letter and spoke into the mic. "Power is loud when it wants to be, but justice is persistent. Quiet, steady, and it's finally being heard here." Across town, the statue in front of the courthouse, a towering stone officer with one hand raised, had become a subject of debate. For years, it had stood as a symbol of control. Some still wanted it to remain. Others wanted it gone. But that morning, someone had quietly placed a handwritten sign at the base. It wasn't political. It didn't blame. It simply said, "Power without accountability is fear. Power with accountability is peace." No one removed it. That night, as the streets settled again and businesses closed their doors, the town felt different. Not fixed, not healed, but no longer numb. And in his home office, Leonard sat alone, staring at a list of departments next on his review schedule. Madison was the beginning, but it would not be the last. 2 months later, Madison County stood in contrast to its former self. What was once a quiet, watchful town, one where silence was mistaken for peace, now moved with a different kind of energy. People spoke more openly in coffee shops. Town hall meetings filled every seat. Civil rights workshops were posted on church bulletin boards next to bake sales and lost dog flyers. Teachers were assigning essays on justice and power in high school classrooms. The shift was real. You could feel it in the air. The courthouse had a new rotation of officials. Judges previously known for rubber-stamping police cases were now under formal review. A new interim police chief, Janet Keene, had been sworn in, a woman with 2 decades of experience in community-focused policing. She made it clear from her first day, no officer would carry a badge in Madison County without understanding its weight. "A badge is not just permission to act," she told the force. "It's a contract with the people. And if you break that contract, you lose the badge." She installed body cams with automatic uploads, created a civilian oversight committee with real power, not just the appearance of it, and began hiring new recruits through independent panels, not internal referrals. Some officers left on their own, others were let go. But the ones who stayed were forced to confront the truth of the department they'd served, whether they liked it or not. Clint Riley never returned. No one really knew where he had gone. But word was he'd sold his house quietly and left the state. Some said he moved up north. Others said he took a job at a warehouse, something far removed from a badge, a gun, or authority. No press, no statements, just gone. A shadow exiting the story, leaving behind only the echoes of what he chose not to say. Joel Richards, on the other hand, became something unexpected, a bridge. After cooperating fully with the investigation, he was offered a position on the statewide reform board, not as punishment, but as proof that change was possible from within. He spoke at forums, visited academy classrooms, and talked to young officers about the cost of silence. Courage isn't just about drawing a weapon, he'd say. Sometimes it's about drawing a line, even if you're the only one standing behind it. Monica Trigg stayed in her new position, not for recognition, but because she finally felt like her voice mattered. She still answered the phones, still heard fear in some callers' voices, but now when she passed information along, it wasn't ignored. Reports were followed up, cases were reviewed, victims were contacted, and when someone said, "Will anything happen if I speak up?" she could finally answer, "Yes, it already has." And then there was Leonard Kane. The Attorney General continued his mission, visiting departments across the state with the same quiet, focused determination he'd brought to Madison County. But he never spoke about that day, the day he was arrested, cuffed, and booked by men who didn't know his name. Not in public, not in interviews, not even when reporters begged for the story. He didn't need to tell it. The town had already done that for him. One afternoon, Leonard returned quietly to Madison. No press, no escorts. He walked down Main Street, past the diner, the barber shop, and finally to the courthouse steps. The old statue was gone now. In its place stood a new piece, simpler, cast in bronze. It wasn't a figure of a man. It was a set of scales, one side balanced with a badge, the other with a raised hand, not in resistance but in request. Beside it, etched into the base, were the words, "Justice must not wait to recognize power. Power must never forget who it serves." Leonard stood there for a moment, reading it. Behind him, a young boy walked by with his mother and pointed up. "Mom, who made that statue?" His mother smiled. "The people did." Leonard smiled faintly and walked on. Back at the Capitol, his office was filled with files. Other counties, other patterns, other truths waiting to be pulled from beneath the surface. He opened the next one and picked up his pen, because Madison was just the beginning, and power, once unchecked, was now being watched by the people who once feared it most. If you found this story powerful, give this video a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Your support means a lot.